Wish TV. All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage, exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders, expert analysis on critical legislation. From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Don't let high golf rates drive you out of bounds. Save big with the Wish TV Great Golf Club card.
Central Indiana's largest golf club card membership is back for the 8th season with more courses than ever before. Save over 75% on tee times at 27 Central Indiana golf courses. All you need is the Wish TV Great Golf Club card. Cards are valid for the entire 2026 golf season.
Great courses, great savings. Score your Great Golf Club card today.
Central Indiana. Wish TV is now live on YouTube TV and Hulu Live, offering more hours of local programming than any other station. Search for Wish TV or look for CW8 on both YouTube TV and Hulu Live to find us. Watch local news, sports, and lifestyle shows live from Wish TV. You can still catch Wish TV free over the air or stream it live on wishtv.com and on the free Wish TV mobile apps. Wish TV, available in more places for the latest news, weather, and sports.
Garrett Bergquist, government reporter for Wish TV and the producer of All Indiana Politics. Vop Osili has served on the Indianapolis City-County Council for the past 15 years. He spent 8 of them as council president. In our last episode, he told me how his upbringing in Haughville and in Nigeria shaped his approach to politics. In part 2 of our conversation, I asked him about his career as an architect, including some buildings he designed right here in Indianapolis. And joining us once again, former Indianapolis City-County Council President Vop Osili. Vop, welcome back.
Thanks, Garrett. Glad to be back.
So Vop, as we alluded to in our last discussion, your professional background is as an architect. What first drew you to architecture?
I think it was my mom, actually, and my father, too, but my mother primarily. She had an interest in homes. And when I was a kid, the Sunday Star always had, in the back of one of the sections, always had floor plans. And for whatever reason, they always intrigued me. And so, like my mom would make a special occasion to go out and look at some of like the model homes that were being built. And just something about that just ignited inside. Like, I could imagine the 3-dimensional component of it. And even because I was about 7 by the time, even then, I just knew that like a great space can like transform how you feel. And it started from there.
So then you studied architecture at Carnegie Mellon, is that correct?
Exactly, yes. I got a Bachelor of Architecture there, a professional architecture degree. Yeah.
All right, so tell me about your first job out of college.
First job out of college was for a gentleman by the name of Walter Blackburn. And Walter's father, Cleo Blackburn, was a longtime executive director of Flanner House. I had known Walter as a kid because... I knew of Walter as a kid because we all went to the same church. He and his wife, Alpha Blackburn, were just sort of models for me. He was an architect. I thought he was the coolest thing. From a 7 or 8-year-old perspective, drove a Corvette, just always was so cool. And when I got the opportunity to interview him in my 5th year at the school, because architecture is a 5-year program, the Bachelor of Architecture. He offered me a job, and I was thrilled because I knew his work, I knew his reputation, and he made it special. He was an amazing mentor. He talked about the fundamentals of architecture, but he also talked about the impact of architecture and what it does do to an environment, what it does to the people who occupy the very things I was thinking about when I was a kid. And he brought it to life for me. And because I think he was African American, there was a way for me to relate to him, like, wow, this could be me in 20, 30 years. There was just that ability to see myself like him. And then Alpha, who, did the interior design components of the projects. She was also like a fashion designer, and she used to be she used to be on Wish. She had her own program here on this very network. That was my first, and it was an amazing experience.
You raised a point, and this is actually something that I've wanted to ask an architect for a long time. When you first set out to design something, how do the building's surroundings and its intended use shape it?
Wow, that is the fundamental. So you can look at it two ways. You could be someone like a Frank Gehry and say context doesn't matter. What matters is the beauty of this particular facility, the beauty of this particular object. Or you can work within the context so that it feels like it's part of the family of the buildings and the surroundings. And it just depends on whether you are, I think folks like Frank Gehry or Zaha Hadid and other folks, they're called starchitects. If you're a starchitect, then, it's like we don't care about anything else around us. We're going to be the star here. This building's going to be the star. And all the other buildings are just, they're just background. But in architecture school, we are taught to look at the context and to think about, how does it relate? How does it fit in? It's kind of like, you get married and, you gotta work with your in-laws. You know what I mean? You gotta you try to figure out how do we all get along and have, a happy future. So you can look at it just in those two ways.
And when we're talking about the context, it's not just the buildings, the physical structures around it, it's also the neighborhood too, right?
Absolutely. All of those work together to be, one wants to be sensitive. If you're really going to be, I think, an architect that the work actually improves a community, you are factoring in all of those elements. You are factoring in, the community, the folks who live in the community. How could they interact? How do they feel comfortable walking, past it, walking into it? Is it a friendly building? If you think about this, if you're walking down the street and you're passing a brick wall, you probably don't necessarily, with like no windows, you probably don't have that warm kind of, ooh, I wonder what's on the other side. I'd love to go in. Versus something that has open windows and ability to see what's going on the inside, that feels welcoming, wide open doors, that sort of engages you and makes you feel like this building is someplace I'd like to be in. And so when we think about the impact on a community, what's the face we're giving back to the community? Is it one of welcome? Is it one of embrace? Is it one of please come and partake and come inside and enjoy? And that then has an impact depending on the type of facility. If it's a mall or retail facility or something along those lines, you definitely want people to feel comfortable walking inside. Now, if it's something else, if it's a commercial building and or let's just say it's a plant of some sort, it probably doesn't matter because they're not coming in anyway. But those things all matter. Most importantly, I believe, it is how do we make a building feel like it belongs, feel comfortable for the surrounding neighborhood, its neighbors adjacent to it, that it doesn't stand out and feel oppressive or offensive.
Tell me about your first project as an architect.
The first project was actually with Walter. It was a major project for me. It was a building that, I hate to say it, just came down this year. It was at Indiana Avenue and Michigan Street, and it was called the 501 building. And so it sat on the canal at that sort of V junction of the downtown canal, Indiana Avenue, and Michigan Street. And it had, I think, the prominence of a Flatiron building, like the Flatiron building in New York, at 22nd and Broadway. It was just a great opportunity that Walter gave me. So we had a tower in the corner, 3 stories. It was occupied by a law firm on the upper levels, and IU School of the optometry on the first level. And then at the canal level, there were other uses. But it was an amazing opportunity. I'm right out of school, super excited to be able to do work and to do something that was so prominent. It was 1 block south of the Madam Walker building. And, I just appreciated Walter giving me that opportunity to put some design flair on it. I mean, ultimately it was his, but to put some design flair on it. And, I did love that building. I loved it, and here's something else. Sometimes we pride ourselves on certain things that no one else sees, but the building's efficiency was incredibly high. And in other words, how do you get as much leasable space and as little sort of common space, and still make it all function, so that the landlord gets more for the square footage. And because it was a triangular building, we were able to make it incredibly efficient, over 95%.
I understand that you helped design the parking garage at Indianapolis International Airport as well.
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
Okay, so by then, so this is like 2002, 2003. I and my business partner had established a firm. His name is Sanford Garner. We established a firm called A2SO4. They were in the planning stages of our new airport, and we marched up to them with, I think we had like maybe 10 or 12 people. We marched up to them and said, to the program director and to the chairman of the board, we got a meeting set up that we wanted to work on it, and they were really kind to us. They said, you realize that this is a full-blown airport, and you have how many people? So it was like, well, yeah, we got 10. Isn't that enough? And they were really kind. I mean, really, really gentle with us, because they said, okay, listen, the challenge that you have right now is capacity. Why don't you go out and maybe get another few architects, and you guys come back and with more capacity. And I took them up on it. There were 5 other architecture firms that we brought together, put it under an umbrella called the Art Consortium, and combined, I think we had 58 or 60 people, all with a common vision, though, that if we are stronger together, then we would be apart. And we went back to the airport, gave them our all of our credentials, showed them our capacity, and they were good to their word. They were like, okay, let's see if you can do this. And at the time, I think it was the largest garage in Indiana. It was 7,100 cars, and what an opportunity! I mean, it was a great opportunity. One, to try and make a garage not look like a garage, and so on 3 sides, it looks really good. Now, on the side that you enter when you're entering into the airport grounds, we had to take the facade off of it. It saved approximately $3 million, just to keep it as just a bare bones garage, and we did that. But on those other 3 sides, on the 2 short sides and the side that faces the terminal, I think it's beautiful. And it goes back to this notion of not everything, just because because it fulfills a function, has to look like the function it fulfills. You can actually put design onto something that is appealing and that works with the surroundings. And if you go to it, you will see that we took elements from the actual terminal building and incorporated those into the garage, so that it's just a really pleasant, I think, view. So next time you're at the airport and you're looking towards the garage, if you're in the terminal, I just want you to experience it, and just you can send me a note and say well done, and we love it.
Yeah. What are some other projects, both here and also around the world, that you're really proud of? I understand you did some work in Dubai, for example.
It was Abu Dhabi. The beautiful part about having that opportunity to do a garage, and a garage of that size and that scope, it gave us a lot of confidence. And this goes back to something that is important to me about how do we build our small businesses, because it's not just about getting more contracts. It's having the confidence to do the work, but to aspire for even sort of greater opportunities. And that was provided to us by a fellow in the UAE. We'd partnered with a firm called R.W. Armstrong. They were an engineering firm, and we had acquired their architecture. Because at one point in time they had an architecture department. We acquired that and incorporated them into A2SO4. And we heard about an opportunity in UAE. The business development guy actually called and asked me an odd question. He asked, can you design a 7-star hotel?
A 7-star
hotel. A 7-star hotel. Not a 5-star, a 7-star. But the good thing about being an architect is it gives you an element of imagination, right? A level of creativity. And I said, of course, well, yes, not a problem. And so then I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? But, the good part was that a good friend of mine from Carnegie Mellon, was a vice president at a firm that we had all loved in college. It's a firm called Architectonica. They're based in Miami. And I called her because I realized if we are going to get an opportunity in the UAE and they're building these mega projects, then I really need horsepower. Not the kind of horsepower that we've already built up, because we were one of the local architects, for example, on Lucas Oil Stadium. That took horsepower, but the kind of horsepower to go to the Middle East and compete. So I called her, and she was like, we've been trying to get in there. And I said, well, I think you have an opportunity now. Are you ready to, join forces? And, she's like, yep. And I would say, so this was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving in 2004. By the middle of December, we were in the UAE, and we were pitching our goods as a joint team. And we ended up with, the first major project was a project called The Gate. It's on Reem Island, R-E-E-M, Reem Island. And it ended up being 5 60-story buildings arranged in this amazing kind of Stonehenge configuration. And things, just if you can imagine it, they can build it. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we did on it because it showed, one, that we had skills, but we could compete at a global level. But none of these things would have happened, neither the garage or Lucas Oil or the projects in the Middle East, if we had not collaborated. And it's something that I continue to stress. And in the future, if I ascend to a higher office, it is going to be something that I'm going to continue to encourage people to do, because we're a lot more strong. We're just stronger when we are collaborating than when we're operating in our silos. And that's just not in architecture. That's across the board in business. And in order for us to be, I think, this world-class city that we can be and that we've got all of the goods to be, it does come to, let's drop our silos. Let's figure out ways that we can work together. And it was a great lesson, for example, working at the airport in the garage, because working with 5 other architects is not an easy task. Each architect thinks that his or her design is, their skills are just out of the world, right? But how do we tame egos and come up with something that we can work with and make into something that is just great? But great lessons from all of those. And the working in the Middle East for sure provided that. It was an amazing experience because it led to other projects too. It led to projects for example, in Morocco, in North Africa, on a race course. A camel race course. Didn't even know there was such a thing, but we learned there was an existing camel race course in Marrakesh, and they wanted to turn it into something. And so, it's circular actually, and they wanted to turn it into this new development, and we were given the opportunity to do that.
What's it like to be able to point to a structure, a building or a parking garage or whatever, and say, I designed that?
It is incredibly rewarding. To see something in physical form that at one point in time was just in one's mind. It's just that act of creation is rewarding. I imagine other people have it in their own realms, probably lawyers do when they're setting out, their briefs and everything else, and if they're victorious and in the court, they probably feel that same way. But ours is physical. We can see it. We can pass it every day. And there's a great joy in that. And then, if I can say this, the person who really kind of gave me an opportunity, even before the A2SO4 day, was a fellow by the name of Sam Jones, who had been president of our Indianapolis Urban League. And I was really just getting started. I decided I would go out on my own, venture out, like Walter had ventured out when he got started. And he gave me just so much confidence, to go out there and establish myself as an architect. And Sam Jones gave me an opportunity to do his Indianapolis headquarters building. That was huge for me, amazing. And for someone of Sam Jones's stature to trust a young guy, I was just in my early 30s, to say, you go do that. You can make it happen. And if I can remember correctly, I think we're at like 35 or 36,000 square feet. It might be more than that. But just, to trust me to do it. And, now that building's still standing. They haven't torn that one down. But, it's just up the street. It's on the other side of the Walker building. It's 2 buildings up from that. An amazing opportunity. And that one, when I go into that building and stand in the atrium, I think about Sam. I think, with such gratitude that you gave me an opportunity to do this. And then I hope that it impacts people in a positive way or inspires them in some way. That's what I feel when I either pass by or enter a building that I've done. And just one more thing. So I designed a church at 56th and Cooper on the northwest side. And what was special about that is it's the church that I ended up getting married in. Now that is a really special thing. How about that? That not only do you go and you worship there and the rest, but to actually be married in the building made it doubly personal and doubly special.
Tell me more about that. What it was like to get married in the very church that you designed.
Well, the good thing was I knew where all the rooms were. Let's start there. The pastor, Landrum Shields, the church is called Covenant Community Church, just gave me that opportunity. And I would imagine any church that someone marries in is a special one. But walking down the aisle towards the stained glass and the light, filtering in behind it, and thinking this is how I imagined it would be for others, and now I'm experiencing it directly myself. It was something else, and the furniture that's on the pulpit, the lighting that shines down from the ceiling. I do remember looking up at those things and then looking around at the furniture because I had selected it, and thinking, this turned out okay. I kind of like this. So yeah, it's just incredibly special. Yeah.
I want to, as we wrap up, I want to return to some points that you made early on. You're talking about in the context of the building and trying to blend it, make it welcoming within the context of the community, and also you talk about collaboration among different firms on some of these projects. Tell me about what you took away from that, how you apply that to politics.
All right, so as I think pointed out a little earlier, this notion of silo and siloing and how that is so limiting for business, to not be willing to reach out to someone who's doing something similar. When the Art Consortium formed, and that was 5 other African American architects and myself forming this entity, the Art Consortium, we were a lot stronger in collaboration than we would have been singularly. As they pointed out to me when I went there, and we had like 10 people, and they said your challenge is capacity. If we want to grow our businesses or just grow a project, we need the horsepower. We all do. I've lived it. I've seen how getting those opportunities finally, keeping your eye on the prize, keeping your eye on the goal, can alleviate some of the competitiveness or any of the disagreements, to say, this is bigger than all of us. Let's keep going in that direction. It's what I think about, governing, keeping our eye on the prize. This is where we want to be. It may not be in 2 years or 4 years. It might be in 10 years. I think about the challenges of 40 and 50 years ago when people made the decision, for example, to build a stadium without a team. I think about those bold decisions, but it was a collective of individuals who said, here's the goal. We may not all agree on the best routes to get there, but let's agree that we're going to work together to get there. And we're reaping the benefits of that right now. We're reaping the benefits of that this weekend with the Final Four, for example, and we continue to do that. So I've seen how that works in our own history and the benefits that we gain from it. And going forward, I see that is the way that we will continue to grow, how we will continue to outpace our neighbors, and become a place individual and unique in the country and on the planet. That Indianapolis is not just and I shouldn't say just, is not a Midwest city like many of its peers, but has the special quality of working together. We've seen it in other ways when we come together around, for example, sports. But we can do it when it comes to the growth of our businesses, the enhancement of our neighborhoods, the investment in our neighborhoods. We can see that, and we've got to keep the goal in mind. How do we raise this city to be a place where everyone wants to be, where the people who live here feel empowered and strengthened, where their neighborhoods are strong, where there's investment in those neighborhoods? We can keep that vision or that goal. We can do it, but we got to keep that in front of us. And so these are all lessons from for me about I got to check the ego. You know what I mean? Those guys are as good a designer as I am. Well, maybe not, but you know what I'm saying, right? But in all seriousness, keeping your eye on the goal, being willing to make the right, the strategic compromises on how do we get there. It makes us unstoppable. A small firm with 10, within 4 years to put up 5 60-story buildings, is a pretty fast trajectory. And then to be working in foreign countries and being invited to work in foreign countries, that all came from collaboration. And there's a strength in that for me. Lessons learned from that.
Well, Vop, thank you once again for coming in. Like I said, I had a couple questions there I'd always wanted to ask an architect, so this worked out great.
Garrett, I hope I answered that last question. I get excited when I talk about things like goals and the future of our city, and how do we build up and strengthen and encourage and empower our residents and our business owners. It gets me going. So I hope I answered the question.
All right. Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you. Thank you.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.